And we're live again. All right, give me 1 second. I'm just gonna make sure that it is good, and I think we're on the right stream. Okay, yeah. Sorry for the hang up, guys. Um, I did a lot to my computer, but hey, we're live now. Okay, that this was an awkward intro, but hey, we got Hello Jim back on.
Good to be back, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. So we're gonna jump right into the topic. So I'm gonna share the exact post. I took a screenshot so people could see what exactly we're talking about.
Oh, you're gonna share a screenshot. You got that kind of technology now.
Yeah, yeah. I figured out
Nice.
my last guest did it. I didn't even know he could do it.
Yeah, I saw that he was sharing like a whiteboard.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, that's neat. So, all right. So this was the post, and so right here we have this is a quote from the Declaration of Independence,
Mhm.
right? So we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right, and then he says, "In the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity." Where was this quote from?
That's from the Treaty of Paris.
Okay.
It should say it underneath it.
Oh, okay.
S
The Treaty of Paris. That's what ended the
End of the American
Revolution.
Revolution.
Okay.
Yeah, Declaration of Independence starts it. Treaty of
hmm
Paris ends it.
So, and it says, from start to finish, the United States would not have come about but through a deep, pervasive biblical worldview. No religion except Christianity could have provided such statements, and as such, we should stand today grateful to God. Now, I guess no, this is pretty presuppositionalist right here, and of course, I wouldn't expect anything different. But I guess why do you think that no other worldview could produce a system where well, let me be specific. What is it about the American system or about this quote that you think requires a biblical worldview?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things you can look at is other civilizations, right, and see
hmm
what has happened within what we might call the Christian West and the particular American experiment as compared to other societies, other civilizations from other frameworks, and see the rapid rise, the rapid uh, improvement, if you will, and then on the back end, global influence of America as a people, as a nation, and as an attractor of those of other people to the American ideals. And
You don't think a deist could
um,
could think
I,
this? I mean,
I,
because
I,
the guy who
I
wrote it
don't.
was.
Yeah, but when you say deist, right,
hmm
you have to remember that on the continuum of, say, atheism to Christianity, a deist of that day was almost indistinguishable from a Christian. Now, granted, Thomas Jefferson didn't go to church. He was
hmm
certainly, you know, um, had his sexual proclivities that we won't get
Right.
into.
yeah.
So
He
certainly
even
his
he even had
lifestyle.
his own version of the Bible. My understanding, he took all the miracles out of it.
Something like that, actually. Yeah, I was able to find a replica of the actual Jefferson
hmm
Bible at a thrift store for like $5.
Oh,
Highly recommended. Because what he does, it goes through the four Gospels, and it's a a generalization, but I don't think it's unfair to say he basically cut out all the miracles.
hmm
But it is neat to see that he's got an English translation lined up with the Latin translation,
hmm
the Greek, and then something else. I forget which. I'm not going to go looking through it now. But I, I say all that to say there's a reverence for the person of Christ and the work of Christ, even in the context of somebody who we might classify as an unbeliever, but because of his theological views, for lack of a better way to say it. But I would say even Thomas Jefferson, as he's writing the Declaration of Independence, recognizes that this idea of rights
Hmm.
is not simply given by governments, that they are uh, given to us by God, by our Creator, has endowed us with unalienable rights, and as you see the nation of America develop into the Constitution, um, the governments are erected to protect and preserve those rights, if you will,
I
not to
agree.
establish them.
So now, aside from the creator part, but the unalienable rights, why couldn't a non-Christian think that a person has those?
Well, I would point to what is the foundation of those rights, right? So
Hmm.
now,
Well, they could just point to the humanity.
I mean, what do you mean by humanity?
Like they could say, like, so since they're a human, they inherently have them.
That that doesn't answer the question of what do you mean by human.
Hmm.
That just reformulates the claim that because they're human, they therefore have these rights. I would say, for example, a
Hmm.
unique aspect of Christian theism
Hmm.
that was present during the founding age is the fact that humans are made in the imago Dei, right? That we are made in the image of God, that we are
Right.
reflective of Him, and as such have a value that is unique to all other life forms of creation, right? And I know you probably would disagree with that to a degree, but at least we can both recognize that the creation days in Genesis, there was one day that man was created, and it was the last. Um,
Hmm.
Christianity would see, some poetic build up to that, right? Like humankind is sort of the crowning achievement of creation, the last
Hmm.
part of creation before God rests on the seventh day, that sort of thing. But there's an example of Christianity being uniquely able to point to a justification for human rights that's not of human invention or human convention, if you will.
Well, okay, so let's say I believe that humans have their inalienable rights just
Hmm.
because they're human, and I'll say that it's intrinsic to being human. I don't
Okay.
believe that. I think that there's some philosophical problems with that. But let's say I said that, and then you say you believe they have the rights because God gave them to them. You seem to be on equal footing
It's
here. Well,
it's not
what?
merely because God gave them to him; it's because of the nature of humanity, right? So it's not um, purely, and that's where I think some of the language of the Declaration isn't as precise as I would
Mhm.
like as a Christian. But I'm not critiquing that at this point. But for somebody to say, just it's a brute fact of reality that human have these rights, I would
But you're
point.
saying,
I
aren't you
would ask
saying
for a
something
justification.
similar? Aren't you saying something similar that it's a brute fact based in the fact that it's an Imago Day? So like, because of the Imago Day, you have these rights. That itself is a brute fact, wouldn't it?
Well, we would agree that it's a brute fact. The
Hmm.
difference is I have a justification beyond myself for stating it, whereas in this illustration, this hypothetical, you don't. You're just saying it is what it is without any explanation. And I think uh,
Well,
just as the founders would have argued that there needs to be a justification because they were in the existential struggle of whether or not their rights are granted to them by the king, who some argued in those days the divine right of kings, which I think we both would agree
mhm.
is not the right way to go about it, um, uh, for lack of a better way
Well,
to phrase it. But
what is the
but
justification for thinking the Imago Day grants rights?
for example, the command that goes to Moses basically
Hmm.
against murder, that's uh, connected directly to the image of God, right? So you, we are not, we don't have the authority to
Hmm.
snuff out the image of God in another human being. That would be murder. Um, so that's the life aspect, if you will. There's a freedom that I would argue is inherent in the course of the biblical story,
Hmm.
the liberation of humanity from the slavery of sin. We see it more metaphorical in the Exodus story of the Israelites being brought out of Egypt. We see it, over the course of Israel's history, going into and out of
Okay.
captivity, and ultimately in the ministry of Christ and the apostles.
Let
That
me break
there's
down. Let me break down my the issue that I'm seeing here. So
okay.
value. First, what do you think
hmm
value to you? What is value?
Um, I mean, it's a product of one's religion, for lack of a better way to say it. I mean, I don't.
I'd say
If you're
it's a
talking about the
product of
value of
one.
humanity,
Yeah. So like to say that a value
hmm
is something that's important to you. It's something that matters to you. It matters to some mind.
uh,
Like there's no
I wouldn't
objective
say it
value.
just matters to me.
Well,
I would say that it matters
yeah,
to the creator, and therefore it should matter to me, and it should matter to you.
it matters
Whether
to a
whether
mind.
okay, if you wanted to phrase it like that, I
Yeah.
wouldn't.
So like I mean, the creator has a mind. What I'm saying, like it, but the value is based in a mind,
Okay.
right? Now, so you said so the creator values humanity, therefore humanity has value, right?
I think that'd be an oversimplification, but sure, we'll go
Okay.
with that.
Well, I don't see why couldn't humanity value itself, and therein now it has value because value is subjective. It's about what's important to a mind. There isn't some objective value.
Yeah, and you're using the objective as in mind independent, whereas subjective is mind dependent, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in that framework, you could say that,
Hmm.
except that humanity has shown over and over and over again throughout history, all time, civilizations, that there is not a blanket across the board value for human life. There,
Well,
there are
it gets it.
people,
It
there are
gets it
groups of
wrong.
people who are dehumanized that are
Hmm.
seen as less than people, even today in our society.
I think you see that in the Bible, though.
I, would not disagree that you see that. I would argue that it's not prescribed that way. That when you see
Okay.
uh, ill
I.
treatment, like when Moses murders the Egyptian and goes out into the wilderness,
Mhm.
that's not therefore an endorsement of his killing of the Egyptian.
How about when Saul lost his anointing because he didn't go through go through perfectly with the genocide that God told him to do?
Well, I mean, I think the issue there is disobedience to God.
I mean, everybody's disobedient to God,
Right, but I mean
right? But
that's what's at issue is God commanded Saul
they're
to
not
do
on equal
something.
footing. So there are some people
What do you mean they're not
who
on equal footing?
they're not on equal footing as in their value, at least their treatment. Like there are
That's
some.
not true.
Okay, well there's a group of people
hmm
who God told Saul to eliminate
Yeah,
the
why did he
entire.
do that?
Well, I have to go back and look at this. I think it has something to do maybe with the way they were treated when they came out the promised land. Israel was treated when they came out the promised land. I'm not sure. The
So you
but
have Israel being used as an instrument of judgment
mhm.
against a people that showed ill treatment towards
the
their neighbor.
problem the problem is like judgments against people groups are problematic. Judgment should, if we're talking about all men are created equal and have these
hmm
unalienable rights, then
Sure.
judgment should apply to individuals. Like you can't punish an entire group of people.
I would disagree with that in principle, but I mean, if you wanted to
Okay,
maintain
so
that view, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you would reject the biblical corpus as
okay,
a whole, right?
so how
So,
about for the slave trade? Could we punish all Portuguese?
um,
Just all of them.
so if you're asking me if we as uh, people
would it
now
would it be
made the
moral?
decision, it would not be moral. See, it's different. It's a category difference when um, it comes from an individual human to commit a genocide, for example, as opposed to God instructing someone to execute judgment on a people for his own purposes.
Okay, but
That in and of itself, though,
oh,
I would also
well, what
argue,
I'm
does not undermine the value of anybody involved in this equation because they were made in the image of God.
but you certainly don't have these unalienable rights. Like they're definitely alienable, and it doesn't necessarily have any impact on what you do. It can be based on who you are.
Well, I mean, you're also bringing out an example of God specifically ordering somebody to do something for a specific reason at a particular period in time,
Yeah.
and trying to use that to undermine the idea that general equity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in
That's
18th
just one
century
example
American
though.
colonies. I know, but I mean, like
Like I can
when
point
you
to a
try to
bunch
pluck
of
that,
other.
when you try to cherry pick that example out and try to use it to undermine the what the Bible would prescribe believers, especially after the resurrection and after the New Testament and apostolic age. I think you're doing a disservice to
How,
reading comprehension and literature
how
at that
about for
point.
any of the Canaanites when God told them to wipe them out? God said to wipe them out.
All of them. I mean that
Then okay,
all of them were marked for destruction.
right,
That's
but that's not cherry picking here. Like we right here. This is an
right. But that
example of how unalienable rights can actually be applied. But then we don't see that.
well, no, because we're not in a position, or nor were the founders in the position of getting direct revelation from God in that same way for those same purposes. Right?
Okay,
That's where I think you're misunderstanding and misapplying the biblical text there, and
so God
it
grants the
doesn't it doesn't undermine the the Imago Dei or the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness,
so
or
God
property, as John
God
Locke said.
God grants the unalienable rights, but He can violate them or circumvent them in some way.
Oh, yeah, he can execute judgment on any of us at any point in time.
Okay.
That's something that is seen also regularly. It's not it's not the case that humanity has been endowed with this gift to execute divine judgment however they see fit apart from God's ordination. So when you have, say,
Hmm.
18th century, um, say the French Revolution, for
Hmm.
example, so certainly not anywhere close to theistically motivated as the American founding, you see lots and lots of bloodshed. The reign of terror, and all through that, you have
Right. And
individuals who are determining among themselves to execute judgment as though they had the authority to do so.
right. And I would say those were bad and they were violating their rights. But now for
Hmm.
God, you're saying he wasn't violating their rights. You're saying
That's
he
correct.
he was able to do that.
Yeah, because they had committed sin to God first and
Everybody.
foremost. What, but particularly the Amalekites, the Canaanites, the
But
all the
particularly
inhabitants.
everyone is a sinner. So what I'm saying is, but
Hmm.
there's not equal treatment even among the sinners. You
Hmm.
have this earth with a bunch of people on it. Everybody's sinful.
Hmm.
And then there's some God is wiping out and some he's not. And the his basis for wiping out some and not wiping out others is because of who they are.
No, it's not because of who they
Yeah,
are.
that's exactly the reason, right? Because
No,
he no,
that's
no,
that's the thing.
the group that Saul was told to completely genocide, right?
Hmm.
To eliminate, right? Obviously, those individuals did not mistreat Israel when they came out of Egypt. Like it's not like these people weren't alive at the time,
Hmm.
right? This was like several hundred years later. This is just
Yeah.
another group of people. That's why I asked, like, would it be okay to punish all Portuguese right now for the transatlantic slave trade? Like, it, that would be absurd because those individuals weren't responsible.
Well, I think that's something that you're not either seeing or not applying in the text is the nature of federal headship. And when we're talking about governments, there's a responsibility that government leaders have over their people. And when you have a tribe of folks, the Amalekites in this example, we're talking centuries of what may be called unprovoked aggression toward the Israelites. And sure, there are individuals within that society of Amalekites that were not directly involved in that.
Yeah, none of
That
them were. I
that
would
that
say.
that doesn't necessarily stand that they do not bear uh, part of the guilt with that,
Why
and
would
how
they?
that works out.
Do Portuguese now bear part of the guilt for the slave trade? I mean, do any like white Americans who have family that was here during the 1800s, are they responsible for the thing? I mean,
I think
you
you
can
should
look at
have
my
Ibram X. Kendi
history.
on because he would certainly say yes.
Okay, right. Okay, because
No, but I think
the,
honestly though,
the pro,
there's a covenant identity
hmm
that is recognized, and so I'm not putting this forward as prescriptive,
okay,
but something that we see in the Old Testament for specifically the Israelites, for example, is uh, there is the Ten Commandments that were presented, and the generation that were led out of Egypt basically all died in the wilderness because of disobedience before they got to the Promised Land. And when they are getting into the Promised Land, one of the last thing that Moses instructs them in Deuteronomy, I want to say 26, 29, something like that. Or actually, no, even before that, in Deuteronomy 6, you have Moses instructing the people, "Hear, O Israel, hear the Lord our God is one." That the Shema. In that, you have later admonition to the people to identify with those who were in bondage and those who were the language is there, but that we were treated harshly, and God brought us out of Egypt. And then you see that repeated in one of the ceremonies for atonement. I believe it's atonement. Later on in Deuteronomy 26:29, that's to be repeated throughout the generations. So this idea of covenant identity spanning back into generations and centuries within a group of people isn't unheard of. And in fact, we see that even now, that there's a desire to want to connect to one's heritage,
hmm
right? We see that with individuals from any walk of life, let alone this tendency to identify, for example, as an African American or a Chinese American or an Irish American. There's a desire that even though you're here and this is a distinct country from where your heritage flows from, to identify with that is still to identify with history. Now, all that to say, I wouldn't say that necessarily
I, I
confers any guilt.
that's the problem because
Yeah,
like I think you can look at anybody's past and then you can go back far enough in their ancestry and you'll find somebody doing something extremely evil to someone else. But like I don't
yeah.
inherit any of that guilt. So because so do you think that group punishment, like, or identity based punishment, do you think that is aligned with the ideas of having unalienable rights?
As a general rule in our day, yeah, I would say those two are in conflict. But what we're dealing with in this time period that you're referring to
hmm
is wholly different than what we're dealing with now. And I would point to, if nothing else, the divine command specifically to execute judgment on these people that we don't have now. We didn't have at the founding era of this nation, and we haven't had since then, despite what the charismatics would say.
Okay. Well, what about okay? So, did, did equality apply to women?
The equality of value, yes.
Okay. Well, what about like equality before the law?
Um, well, I think it depends on which civil structure you're dealing with, right?
Do,
Certainly, the
do
civil
you,
structure of Israelites, it was different. But for example, one of the criticisms that is often drawn of Old Testament um, family arrangements is men having multiple wives. Well, with the number of armed conflicts that you have, you're going to have a lot of husbands dying. And so part of polygamy as a practice, not all of it, but part of it was actually for the security and preservation of those women so that they wouldn't be left homeless, destitute out there. That there's a responsibility that the man took on to care for them. So there was if you will, a recognition of their value in that regard. And I think we see that echoed even in the New Testament, where societally women were not viewed uh, as, for example, being reputable in a
I'm
court
not
of
even talking
law.
about society here. So
No,
right. So
I get that, but talking about God's economy versus what we might see
mhm.
in a descriptive historical analysis is, for example, it's the women who first announced the resurrection of Christ. It's many women along the way in Jesus's ministry, like the Samaritan woman at the well, like the woman who was healed from
Right.
bleeding, that become mouthpieces affirming the arrival of the Messiah. So you see, and that doesn't even begin to get into the apostolic letters
So
that affirm the value of women and the necessity of women, or even in the Old Testament, wisdom herself is personified in the feminine. So I think there's a lot to be said about how God's people have viewed women, and specifically the value that God has towards women, uh, specifically equal to men in that regard.
I want to focus on like the bottom paragraph here. You said from start to finish, United States would not have come about but through a deep, pervasive biblical worldview. So, like,
Yep.
a fundamental part of the United States is in its judicial system is equality before the law.
Hmm.
Okay, now you look at the legal system that God had set up for Israel. There was not an equality before the law. Like,
Mm,
so
okay.
I could give you distinctions. Like for instance, the like a man could sell his daughter into slavery. He couldn't sell his son.
Hmm.
And if he's Hebrew, he's free after 6 years. The daughter isn't. If the man suspected his wife of cheating, he could take her to the temple, make her drink the substance, and is going to sterilize her or make her
It's
barren
not going to sterilize her.
or make
It's
her barren.
going to judge adultery. That's the conversation we had with Facade
Right,
probably last year sometime.
but
That
to
that's
make her
it's
barren.
not. But if there was no unfaithfulness, if there was no adultery, it says right there in the text that no harm will come to her.
Right,
So
exactly.
so we're not talking about
No, no,
sterilizing women.
let me finish here. Let me finish.
Okay.
It would sterilize her if she had committed adultery. But the issue is, well, I mean,
Hmm.
that's just one issue. Even
So
if you
it's a
did commit
judgment.
adultery, okay, sure, okay, but it doesn't apply the other way around. If the wife thinks the husband is cheating, she can't make him go to the temple and then his balls fall off or something like that,
Right.
right? Like there's so we're talking about equality before the law, like regardless of whether it's judgment for adultery. What I'm saying is it's not equal.
Well, it may appear unequal to our 21st century perspectives looking at it. But I mean, for one thing, you're talking about a pre-scientific age, right? If they had the scientific knowledge and technology that we have, you could just do a blood test.
Okay,
Right? That'd be totally different. But when it
you
comes
don't
to
need 21st century science. They have a God who
mhm,
knows everything.
right,
But what I'm saying, why couldn't he give them a system that treated people equally?
I'm not saying he
Because
couldn't.
well, but he didn't. So
He
that
didn't.
yeah,
Agreed.
you don't see. So what I'm saying, if you look throughout Mosaic law, there
Mhm.
is vast inequalities based on who you are, based on your genitals, and also based on your heritage, whether you're Hebrew or not. like non-Hebrew slaves, they were slaves for life versus being free for 6 years if you were Hebrew.
Mhm.
Like that's not equal.
If you want to contend that's fine, but none of that has anything to do with the post or the connection I was drawing between the founders and Christian theology. For
Okay.
example, right nowadays
All right.
you have a large number. I say a large. You have a subset of the population that wants to tear down the statues of, say, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and the like because they held slaves. And part of the argument goes, it's in the totality, so don't at me in the comments, is we should not venerate slaveholders, which certainly, except them being slaveholders is not why they were venerated. So I think that the parallel here is none of the founders were looking at this law and saying, you know what, this is the law we need to model our society after, right? It's not
Uh,
that these
Not.
particulars, right?
I
And
mean,
and
I could say the reason we venerated Bill Cosby was not because he was, you know,
a serial rapist,
assaulting. Yeah, we venerated him because he was funny. That
right?
that doesn't mean we could put up, statues of Bill Cosby
And
everywhere.
I'm not advocating for
Okay.
statues. Cards on the table. I don't like statues of individuals, period, living or dead. Certainly not living, though. Um, all that to say, the reason why Christianity had such an impact on the founding fathers
Hmm.
wasn't because of this law, wasn't because the woman had to drink the dirt water mixture
Right.
and not the man. That's not the arguments they were making. They
Hmm.
were drawing more broad connections, and like we said at the top, even Thomas Jefferson himself, taking away the miracles, still saw Jesus as someone to um, behold and look up to, if you will.
Okay.
And so that's my point is you going to these sundry laws here and using them as a wedge to draw between the founders and Christianity doesn't work because that's not
No, no,
the
no, no, no.
platform they were arguing for.
I'm not drawing a wedge between the founders and Christianity. I'm drawing a wedge between United States and Christianity. Like the system,
Okay, I mean
the
6-1.
system, the system. Well, no, the founders of the United States aren't the same thing. The founders were majority Christians. The United States system is not, and it is not based on Christianity. Matter of fact, there are vast contradictions between them. Like me, even like the Bill of Rights, the first one is a complete contradiction of the first four commandments. You have no other gods before me. First Amendment, you can have any god you want. Don't make for yourself a graven image. Make a graven image if you want. Keep the Sabbath holy if you want to, or not. Keep it unholy. Like there's just huge
It's
contradictions.
I would
Even
push
in
back that that's a contradiction though, because when you see the the way Christian Christianity has viewed those laws, right? Just the
Mhm.
10 Commandments. On one hand, it's a matter of natural law. On the other hand, there's a question of authority. Whose obligation is it to um, enforce those laws, if you will?
well,
And
so
and in Christian history, those first four laws, the first table of the law, is under the authority of the church, not the magistrate, right? So the magistrate can punish you for murder, can punish you for adultery, can punish you for theft, right? The second table of the law belongs to the magistrate. So it's not a contradiction to the
that's not a
Constitution.
distinction that
It's
you see in the Bible. They was killing people for idolatry.
well,
They would kill a false prophet. They would kill people for religious reasons. And
in
it
the Old Testament, sure, because there was a different civilization set up. It was a
right
different framework.
because
It was,
but
I
it
would
was
argue,
getting its
much more
authority
of a
from God.
theocracy.
It was
Yeah,
getting its authority.
because
But
there was
so
direct revelation
and
from there.
no, but it's not. No, that's not why. If you look at Romans 13, all governments get their authority from God. So the
Hmm.
authority that we saw in the Old Testament shouldn't be any different from any
Oh, sure, it should.
government. Well, why would it? 'Cause if they're both getting it, if all government gets its authority from God, then its authority should not alter. It shouldn't change. It
Well,
wouldn't make any sense to say that the governments now have less authority than the one in the Old Testament, because it both come from God.
well, see, what you had in the Old Testament is a collapsing of those spheres. The church and the magistrate were effectively the same, right? They were different tribes of the same people, right?
Where
You
do
had
you
the
see a
Levite
separate?
priests.
Where do you see a separation between like civil and religious laws in the Bible? Like where do you see that? Like I see punishments, like judicial punishments applying for religious reasons in the Bible.
Do you see that in the New Testament? I'm just curious.
No,
Okay,
because the New Testament isn't written like so. There aren't, like, in the Old Testament you have laws that are
hmm
laid out. The New
right.
Testament is a different format. Like in like the
So
Gospels, it's just like it's almost historical, telling
two
stories, and then
two
there's
two
instructions to a
examples come to mind.
church.
Yeah, two examples come to mind. There's a well-known woman caught in adultery, right? Where Jesus does some writing in the dirt, says, "He who without sin cast the first stone," and everybody walks away, right? That's showing that just because there was an adultery, among other things, just because there was adultery practice, didn't necessitate the death penalty. It also showed that the individuals who were wanting to execute that judgment on her should not have. And then in First Corinthians 5, I think it is 5 or 6, there is discussion. Paul is referring to a man in the congregation that is sleeping with his stepmom, basically.
Mhm.
His father's wife. He's taken her, and he is welcomed into fellowship. Now that's blatant adultery. Paul does not say stone this man, stone
Well,
this woman.
but Paul is giving instructions to the church in that instance,
Precisely,
not to a
precisely.
government.
And his affirmation to them
Mhm.
is effectively to excommunicate them. And the wording he uses draws back from the Old Testament law: purge the evil from your midst. So there's a purity that's expected of the church there, but that judicial law is not the church's to mete out. So
Okay, but
there's a couple of examples there. And
right,
so I
but
would
the
say,
instructions to
mhm,
government, if we see
mhm.
how the way a government could handle adultery, they could kill the person in the Bible, and there is no, and
When
there
you
is
say in the Bible, can you be more specific?
wait, yeah, I'm talking about like in Mosaic law, the way adultery
Sure.
is treated.
Again, because you have the spheres of the church and the magistrate collapsed in one society.
Right. So and
You
then
don't see that in the New Testament, for example. You see the church very distinct from the magistrate. The magistrate put to death the Messiah. Even
mm,
another church group, right? The Jews participated in that. There is a definite
so
distinction between the church and the state there.
and the Bible isn't separating the church from the state. In this instance, times are different. The Christian
I
church
would agree.
don't have their own government, right? So
Hmm.
the instructions that God gave to government aren't going to apply to the church. So they couldn't kill somebody for adultery. It would just be a murder. They
Hmm.
just don't have the authority to do that. But if we look at our last instructions on how the government could treat
You
adultery,
you say
which
our. I don't think that applies to you yet, unless you've
well, yeah,
repented.
right, no,
If you have, welcome home,
yeah.
brother.
Well, okay, I would say the instructions apply to everyone, right? Whether you're
Mm-mm.
elected. Okay,
The,
okay,
the instructions don't apply to everybody.
okay.
You're talking about instructions to the government,
Sure,
right?
sure. All right, now, okay. So what I'm saying is, so like this distinction between like civil and religious law
Hmm.
is something that you see later in Enlightenment thought, but not in the Bible. I don't see that.
I think you do, because even in Romans 13,
Mm-hmm.
right? Remember that what's happening during this age is not widespread acceptance of Christianity. I
Right.
mean, Paul, before he writes his letters, he's going around killing Christians, right? So, and the Romans aren't exactly upset with this, because part of the reason Jesus was put to death from a Roman perspective was that he was fomenting a rebellion. So killing the people who claimed to be following in his stead were putting down rebellions before they start, right? So there was not widespread acceptance of this. And so when you see Paul writing to the church,
Hmm.
he's to the church at Rome. Number one, he's writing to the church at Rome. He's not writing to the magistrate at Rome.
But that's precisely my point. Because
And so
if if
that's
he
the
were,
distinction there. He's
if
not
he were,
writing to them. He's acknowledging to the church that the government wields the sword, and doing so in a time when that sword was being wielded unjustly. And so you see this distinction that's implicit in what he's writing. Not only then, but later when in Peter's letters, he's writing to people who have been dispersed. Right,
right
Rome
now,
has sacked them and spread these people out all over. I want to say Mesopotamia, Greece, but that general
r-
area. I'm getting my geography mixed up. But the point is, you don't see the authors of these books addressing the magistrate, just like you didn't see Jesus addressing the magistrate
so
with any forcefulness. I mean, when he's talking to Pilate, he's
so
telling him directly, "My kingdom is not of this world." Right? You do what you do.
okay, so all right.
So all of this is baked into the cake, is what I'm saying. It's
Are
not
you
going to come
saying
out and say specifically church here, state here. That's not the way that the Bible was written, no matter how much we might like it to be. But that distinction is made.
you said there's distinction between the type of laws that the government should be able to make, and the type of laws that a church should make.
I'm saying that the First Amendment to the Constitution is not
Mhm.
in conflict with the Ten Commandments, precisely because of this Christian understanding of
I
the
don't.
Old Testament. I think a
I try.
Jew might be a more effective or a more accurate opponent to lay this
Okay.
view on, because Judaism would identify with these old covenant practices without the lens of the New Testament and Christ's ministry
Uh,
to contextualize them.
okay. When a man was picking up sticks on the Sabbath,
Yep.
and Moses found him, like, hey, say, what should we do with him? God said, kill him, kill him. Do you think that would be a violation of his First Amendment right?
Now,
Yeah.
yep, I would.
So then they are in conflict.
Mm.
Because well, yeah,
No,
because
but
the law requires different things.
but the law doesn't mandate that there has to be the death penalty for it, right? And that's part
But
of, especially
no,
in
but
Christian
what I'm saying,
theology, this
the
idea of
fact that
grace
it's
and
able
mercy
to,
is you
the
you
fa-
don't have to mete out the death penalty just because the offense says so. So that
the $1 fine for picking up sticks on the Sabbath, would it be violating his First Amendment?
um, depends on
The answer is
the other
yes.
circumstances.
I can tell you for a fact the answer is yes.
Okay.
If the government implemented any sort of punishment whatsoever, it didn't even have to be a punishment. It could just have a law to say this shouldn't be done. That would be completely inappropriate and in violation of the
And
First
you can
Amendment.
have that view. It's
But
perfectly within your power
what I'm
to
saying is,
have that view.
so they are incompatible because you're saying like
They're not
it doesn't.
incompatible. That's your
You're saying
conclusion is going too far from what the evidence actually shows.
okay.
They're not in conflict. They're not incompatible.
You were saying that the is not in conflict because the law doesn't require the death penalty. What I'm
Mhm.
saying is the fact that the law could implement the death penalty at all or any sort of penalty means it is in conflict with the First Amendment. You
Okay.
you you could not you could not punish anybody. The First Amendment prohibits punishing anybody for violating any sort of religious law, for doing anything on the Sabbath.
Okay.
So those are contradictions.
Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's about 3,000 years between the two,
Right. Yeah,
and
I agree. But what I'm saying is, like, but it's not pulling from it. So, like, I mean, this is like a foundational principle.
yeah.
How about this?
Well, let me ask you this, right? would you deny that there was a Christian influence on the founding fathers?
Oh yeah, there was definitely a Christian influence on our founding fathers. I mean, but
Okay,
like not
even
not not
even
in
with
good
all of
ways.
these,
Not in
i-
good ways.
you don't think there's any good influence that Christianity had on the founding fathers?
Uh, there's no, not in a way that they influenced the United States. Matter of fact, I would say the United States came about as a result of immigrants and refugees fleeing actual Christian nations.
Mm,
They were leaving. Yes, the British Empire, that was a actual Christian nation where they were punishing people for following the wrong religion, following the wrong types of stuff, blasphemy. You could be killed for it. They were fleeing an actual Christian nation, came here and created something that was neutral to Christianity.
Okay, so
That was
what
indifferent.
in the New Testament do you see connects um, that framework of government with the New
So
Testament
it,
with Christianity?
the New Testament says nothing about how government should operate except for reaffirming God's authority over it. And what authority does
God's
he have?
authority, right?
Yeah, God's
Not
authority.
human authority.
Yes.
Okay.
That's all it does. So you're not going to see any you're not going to see that in the New Testament just because of the type of literature that it was. It was very different. Whereas if
Hmm.
you look at the actual laws that was describing how the government should operate, that's all in the Old Testament, and they're completely in contradiction to our American system. Even this, you even had opportunity for it. This was when I was working on my first master's degree, and I was my first master's was in public policy, and I remember reading the Bible. I was still a Christian at the time, and you're familiar with Israel's history. So they had three kings as a unified kingdom, right? They had
Yep.
Saul,
Saul,
David,
David,
Solomon,
Solomon.
right? And then Judah and Benjamin split from the 10 northern tribes,
Yep.
and Judah and Benjamin, we could just combine them and just call them Judah,
Hmm.
right? They would have good kings. They have a bad one every once in a while, but they're having good kings as well. Israel, if you look at their kings,
That'd be the
they're
Northern Kingdom for
yes,
the audience
Northern
following
Kingdom.
along.
Hmm Essentially, all of their kings are bad.
Hmm.
Like King Ahab, if you're familiar with that guy, he's a really big bad one,
Yeah.
right? He was so evil, God sent the demon to kill him. Right
Take
now,
him out.
right. So that was Israel's king. They would have benefited from something like checks and balances. They would have benefited from separation of powers. Nowhere in there do you see this.
Well,
That
nowhere
was
in
the
there should we expect to see it.
well. If we're saying that the Christianity or if- or the Christian worldview influenced them to create the American system, you should see some similar because that is the separation of powers, and then the checks and separation of powers, as in you have a judicial, executive, and legislative branch, and then you have checks, whereas you give the judicial a few legislative powers, give the legislative branch a few executive powers, etc. Right? So that's the difference. Right? If we're going to say that Christianity had all of this influence on the American system, you should see imported principles like that somewhere in there, and I don't see it. Like it's a complete rejection of it, and there was plenty of opportunity for it, and it's just completely non-existent.
I don't think I follow. I don't think what
So,
you're saying proves what it does.
well, okay. So, what exactly would be the Christian influence on the American system?
I think one of the things that you see is an affirmation of human dignity. Um, that we have those three rights, right? Life,
Hmm
liberty, pursuit of happiness, and for, but because there's property or pursuit of happiness, we just put life and
Yeah,
liberty. There's life and then a degree of freedom
right.
that we have.
Now that kind of go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, how that wasn't consistently followed, And but there's one
Well, just
exception.
because it's not
God.
consistently, just because it's not consistently put forth, doesn't negate the principles. So, case in point, right? The system that God handed down to the Israelites through
Mhm.
Moses, the entire history of Israel in the Old Testament shows a constant stream of disobedience, right?
Right.
Maybe some disobedience, maybe some repentance, but
Sure.
then it's just over and over. So there's not this prolonged betterment of Israel because they're adhering to God's law and God's principles and the like,
Hmm.
right? So, so just because Israel, God's chosen people, who among all the peoples of the earth was given this,
Hmm.
failed to do it, doesn't negate the reality of the principles, doesn't negate the goodness of the foundation that they were given, right? So I would say
So
just because, in the same way, a professed Christian goes out and bombs an abortion clinic, that's not a Christian deed just because a professed Christian goes out and does it.
no, no, no. I don't care about things that Israel was doing outside of God. Right now, I'm
Hmm.
talking about stuff where God commanded, and this isn't cherry picking. These aren't exceptions to the rule. What I'm saying, there are so many exceptions that seems to be the rule. You see inequality throughout.
Hmm.
I mean, and that's pretty much the entire premise. Like
Well, when
God
you say
has a people
inequality, what do you mean by that?
that people are being treated differently, not just
Yeah,
by God, but also by the government that He creates.
and that's what
So the
literally all of the prophets are railing against is like the justice,
no 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 no
not
no
being
no
a respecter of persons,
no no. What I'm
not showing deference to the rich or the poor.
no. So what God is doing the opposite. He treats people differently, not based on their actions, but based on who they are, and then He creates systems that
Well,
treats people differently as well.
it's not because
And
of who they are. I think
it is.
that's a constant bias that keeps being put in this conversation. Like the
How is it a
Amalekites and the
bias?
Canaanites that you put up,
Israel.
they weren't ordered to be killed because of who they were. It was what they had done, namely the crimes that they had committed, or the sins, probably a better way to say it, that they had committed against the Israelites
No,
for a
no, no.
prolonged period of time.
Try to
It's not
understand this.
because they were Amalekites or because they were Canaanites.
You don't understand what I'm saying.
Judgment was tied to specific actions.
The Canaanite babies committed no
Hmm.
act of aggression towards any Israelite. But the Canaanite baby was still killed. He was killed because he belonged to a group that God said did a thing. That's what I'm saying.
Hmm.
So he's eliminating entire groups. Sometimes hundreds of years later, where the individual was responsible for whatever crime no longer even exists.
Yeah, but that
That's what
gets into the
that's what
principle
I'm
of
saying.
headship
So
that we
they're
talked
being
about
killed,
before.
but right, but they're being killed for
Hmm.
who they are, not for anything they did.
No, it's
That is antithetical to the American system.
but and that's not what's happening either. It's not specifically who they are. It's that sin that was committed.
That they
That
didn't
the severity of it was meted out on the entire population.
but they didn't commit. That's what I'm saying. But they didn't commit these were different people, and that's what the American system is built, or the American justice system is built on treating people as individuals. This
Right. There's a
that
sense
is not
of
the way
human
God is.
equality and dignity, and that is fundamentally a biblical or Christian perspective on humanity.
What you mean, treating people as groups rather than individuals?
No, that human beings have dignity, and there's equality among them.
That's not equality.
You say that, but I mean, you
Let
can't
me
pull
see
out
an
special,
example.
cherry pick special instances
It's not
and say that it eliminates the
it's
principle.
not special instances because you keep seeing it over and over again. Like you if I pick one, if it was only one,
Mhm.
then you could say, oh, that's cherry picking. Maybe if it was only two, that's cherry picking. But I'm saying I can do this over and over again. I
But
can
the
show you
principle
it's
against
it is
murder
it is it.
is based on the Imago Dei, is based on the inherent worth and value and dignity of human beings,
I'm not talking
and
about
that goes back to at least the Noahic covenant. So Genesis, what, 9, right? And I would argue even further, because even without an explicit prohibition to not murder, Cain is punished for murdering his brother, right? So, and that points to this concept of natural law, which the deists are fond of referencing in their writings of the time. You see uh, references not to a Christian God, but to nature's God, to natural law, to providence, these Christian ideals and these Christian ideas that are divorced from the text. Um, and I think it's probably, mm,
I think this could break this down. So you have it's Saul's king of Israel. You have an Amalekite baby and an Israeli baby born on the same day. All right, one has to die, and the other one doesn't. What did they do?
I don't know. I would ask you, what did they
Well,
do?
they did nothing, right? They're just babies.
Okay.
The Amalekite baby is dying because he's an Amalekite. That is antithetical to the system, to the American
Hey,
system. The
talking to your mic a little bit more. There's
Okay.
a comment in the chat that you weren't coming through very well.
Oh yeah. Sorry guys, my internet sucks. What's going on is that my I'm going to re-upload a high definition version of this in like a day or two
Oh
after
no, nobody wants a high definition version
right.
of
Yeah.
this.
But like for some reason when it streams to YouTube it gets choppy and then I just download the MP4 and I upload it and then it's smooth. I don't know what's going on. But I'll try to stay close to my mic. But what I'm saying is that the Amalekite baby is dying not because of anything he did, but because of who he is.
I think
That
that's a
is,
stretch,
but
given the circumstance.
but it's not
But
a stretch
okay,
because was your, how is
because
collective
that's not the
punishment.
principle,
It's
right?
collective.
It's like when Jesus walks on the water. That's not an acknowledgement that anybody can walk on the water. But then you could say, well, Peter got out there and walked with him, so everybody should be able to walk on water. Just because there are extenuating circumstances and unique circumstances, let's say it that way, that they don't establish the norm, right? There was a particular purpose for the people of Israel, and I'm not going to get too theological in with all of it, but these judgments that were meted out on other peoples in the area at the time do not reestablish the norms of the law fundamentally.
It's
So when we're
collective
talking about human
punishment.
equality, human dignity, you see throughout Scripture a running theme that God values humankind as a whole.
Okay,
There,
he can value them, but but the way they're treated is not the same.
okay, well,
That
let's say it this way: we're coming at this from completely different worldviews, so we're going to look at the same data and come to different conclusions. Fair?
to a certain extent, but
Okay.
if we're comparing a some story in the Old Testament and seeing how that corresponds to the American system, we should be able to look at it like, whether you're Christian or not. You should be able to look at the collective punishment of the Amalekites and say, no, that is not aligned with the American justice system, with the United States system. You could just say that would be a gross violation of due process for so many reasons. Like the worldview
If you
shift.
wanted to say that, you could.
Well, I don't.
I think you're getting out over your skis on it, but
How could you not say it? Like, okay, tell me, do you think? Okay, would it would it be constitutional for collective punishments to be implemented now?
I, I would say we're talking about a different category of punishment for the reasons I've mentioned before. So to make it shorter, I would just say no.
No,
I
okay,
I, I wouldn't go
right.
with it.
No,
That's why I think it's foolish to, for example, we talked about reparations a while back. I think it's
mhm.
foolish to punish right now anybody for slavery, for any, whether it's criminally, civilly, monetarily, whatever. I think that's foolish.
Yeah, well, so and if you recall, my argument for it was you don't punish people, you punish the United States.
Hmm.
So in that sense, the United States is being punished. Um,
But the United States, as constituted now, is not the same one
it is.
that
It is.
allowed.
It is the same system.
Let's see.
It's the
So
same government. It's the Constitution. It's the
so
same government.
take that. So the individuals in government are different now. So you're
No, 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 no.
effectively making the same argument for
No, I'm not.
punishing
But
the
that's what I said.
Canaanites and the Amalekites
No, no,
because
no.
they're different individuals, but it's the same
You know,
institution.
no, it's not. So no, no, no. So you
So
can
is it
punish.
not the same institution?
Yeah. So the United States could owe debt from. Let's say the United States had a loan from
Hmm.
France in the early 1800s. If that money isn't paid off, the United States still owe that money.
Hmm.
It doesn't go away because the individuals who are alive in the country died
I'm,
because
I'm right there with you.
the debt didn't belong to any particular individual. It belonged to the state.
Hmm.
So you can still hold the state responsible. Here here's the huge difference. When we're talking about a punishment, death penalty, that doesn't apply. You can't apply a punishment that way to the America in the American system. And I get it. You could say,
Sure,
okay,
sure you can. You and you and Fasad both have advocated punishing the children of rapists through abortion. That's the death penalty for an innocent
no,
person.
no, it's not.
Sure, sure it is.
No, that's not a
And that's
punishment.
that's not even
That,
a born
that's
child,
that's not no,
right?
that's not a
That's a
punishment.
child that has
No,
not done
it's
anything.
just
You're
categorically wrong. Not a
snuffing out an
punishment.
innocent human life.
No,
What
not
is that human life
that.
done to deserve the death penalty?
So it doesn't deserve the death penalty. That's
Okay, but
because
that's what
like
abortion does is it kills
no, it's
the
not. No, it's not. The woman could keep the baby if she wants to. So like if it was a penalty, then the baby would just be punished, boom, and that'd be it. So
and
that
that's what
is
happens.
categorically wrong. That's not how that works.
Okay,
What we're
go ahead.
saying here is okay, and I could just grant, and I could just give to you that okay, abortion is wrong. God was killing a bunch of babies.
Okay.
So all right, so do you was it okay for God to kill babies? Because if we're going to say that the American system is wrong, then wouldn't it
Who
also
said the
be
American system is wrong?
well? If you think for some reason that in the American system babies are being punished when they're aborted,
No, I'm saying that it's advocated and permitted now that when you
did
have
you
a rapist
did you
conceive a
think
child, that and the
do you
rape
think
victim conceives
babies?
the child, that it's not the rapist father who is put to death, but it's actually the child who's put to death through the process of abortion. Now,
Right?
there's no due
You you
process to it. That's
you,
another
you think
part of it that makes it unjust.
you think
There's
that's
no due process. There's no human equality before the law in that senate in that sense.
you think so you think babies are so you right now you still think babies are punished when they're aborted. I'm with you.
Effectively, yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't want to go on an abortion thing,
I,
but like, but
that's
this
fine.
is yeah. Um, okay, so now what I was saying was, so if we're saying that Christian that the founders were pulling from their Christian beliefs or pulling from the Bible when they were creating this American system, we should see the influence. And I look at it and I don't see it. And when you
Well, of
point,
course you don't.
when you
You've
try
got
to
your blinders on.
no, no, no. But when you try to point out what the influences are, I can point out not just one exception, but their exceptions are so prevalent throughout the Bible that it seems to be the rule. Like,
You said it seems to be, but you're using extenuating circumstances and using that to override the rule, which, as I pointed out earlier,
the, the rule,
that's in practice the
but
same thing as saying we built statues to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson because they were slaveholders.
but
No.
collective punishment is allowed in the Bible. Yes or no?
Okay. It was meted out in the
Right.
Bible.
So
I wouldn't say it's
it was
permitted in
allowed.
the sense that
No.
it's instituted in law, because you don't see the law establishing kill all of those people. You see God ordering the Israelites specifically, those folks, but the ones that are inhabitants on the land that I'm giving to you. I'm giving you this land and using you to judge them. But all of that is categorically different. But
All right. All right. So here is collective punishments being instituted by the law. Right. We see with the Ammonites and the Moabites, they were explicitly barred from the assembly of the Lord.
okay, yeah, a lot of non-Jews were prohibited.
No. Okay, no. Not just non-Jews. Like so, like you could convert. If you were an Ammonite or a Moabite, you could not come in. That was based in the law. If
Okay,
you were of those ethnic groups, you could not come in. Period.
that's
So
not the same thing as
it's the
killing
same.
them.
No. We weren't talking about killing. We
Yeah,
were
we were.
talking
You're
about
talking about the difference
no.
between a law implementing, standardizing
Goodness. That's
the
not what I was talking
execution
about.
of groups.
That's not what I was talking about. I was talking about
That's
collective
the
punishment.
examples you were bringing out.
But yeah, but
Collective punishments.
the issue is collective punishment, not necessarily just killing. The issue is collectively,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
because being killed for a crime isn't antithetical to the American system. I don't have an issue with that. Right?
Okay. But
The
the
issue that
what
we
I'm
have
saying.
is
Okay.
collective punishment.
Okay.
So the thing that you said that is not in the law, it is. We see that it's in Deuteronomy
That's
23.
that's not what I was saying. That's what I'm trying to
Okay.
explain to you is
You were
what.
saying that collective punishment is you were saying that when we saw collective punishment in the Bible, those were just special instances when God was commanding it, but we don't see that as like a rule
That's
when
not
you
what
look
I
at
was
the
saying.
law.
I
Okay.
was talking about the specific examples that you brought up
Hmm.
about the destruction or the annihilation of the Canaanites and the Amalekites,
Right.
that there was nothing in the law that instituted that as the norm to go out and kill those people. I'm
Okay.
not making a proclamation about what you're calling, I forget the term you're using, collective
Collective
punishment.
punishment.
I'm not making any sort of thing. I'm talking about a specific punishment that you've brought up routinely over and over again in the course of this conversation.
What collective punishment is so the issue. Remember, the issue is not killing. The issue
Okay,
is that the punishment is applied to a group based on who you are. So if you're a Moabite, you cannot join the assembly of the Lord. That's a law. Just period. Why? Because you're a Moabite. It has nothing to do with that individual's actions. It is treating people as a collection. It's treating people as groups. That is
okay.
antithetical to not on. It's not only just un-American. It's un-Western. Like you in Western.
I don't know if you know this, but the Bible is not a Western book.
Yeah, clearly, clearly, clearly. But okay, but what I'm okay. So if you look at Western systems
Hmm.
and the United States specifically, you keep running. So where else do you see the Christian influence on the American system? Can you like
Yeah, I mentioned it before. The concept of natural light or natural rights, natural law. That the deists of the time were fond of referencing natural law, nature's God, without specifically Trinitarian
right?
references.
Do you think
Uh,
do you think collective collective punishments is in line with natural law?
um, the way you're framing it, I would I wouldn't have an opinion one way or another. But
If I
specific
said
to natural rights, I
if
would point to specifically that quotation where
I
Thomas
said right now,
Jefferson, a deist, writes that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I
mhm,
would argue that no other philosophy, no other religion can provide that statement. other than Christianity. Or
I,
if you wanted to expand it to
Christianity, but I say Christianity
Judaism
did.
and Islam, but neither of those had a demonstrative impact on the founders of the day. And in fact, Islam was uh, on the other side of many conflicts with the Barbary pirates. But like you can't get that from secularism. You don't get that from uh, even a pure deism because there's no way you can know because there's no revelation that uh, all men are created equal, that all men have, everybody has the right to life,
But
everybody
the
has
the
liberty.
revelation that they were getting was contrary. The revelation they were getting was collective punishment. The revelation they was getting was um, putting all government power into one person. That is
Who's
the
this?
is the Bible. So remember when I was talking about like the way after the kingdom split and
Hmm.
all of Israel's kings were
Yeah,
evil. I pointed that out because since they were all evil, there was ample opportunity to implement a system that could help negate that. Checks and balances, separation of powers is a good way to do that, and it didn't.
yeah,
So
and
it concentrated all power into an individual. That is the revelation they were getting.
the revelation that the founders were getting.
No, that whoa, no, no. You were saying okay. You were saying that the secularists couldn't come to the conclusion that we have unalienable rights like life, liberty, and property or the pursuit of happiness because they weren't getting
N-
direct revelation.
Not
When I
not
said
not
the
from.
people who were getting revelation weren't getting those type of ideas. They weren't getting life, liberty. They were getting slavery. They was getting collective punishment. They was getting difference. You could women and men are treated differently between the law.
I don't think you'll
That is
find that as you read through the writings, the correspondences of the framers or of the founders of the country.
you won't get that from yeah, you won't see the founders because they weren't influenced by the Bible in this
I,
regard.
I think they were specifically. You
Well,
mentioned
where is it?
limited government, separation of powers. Part
I'll
of
show you the
that,
Bible.
one, I will grant experientially, like they're going to war with a king, right? So a monarchy. So there is part of it that's like, hey, maybe we just spread this out, but consistent with Christianity and an understanding of the depravity of man and a tendency toward tyranny when power and authority is consolidated, separating that out is perfectly consistent with that. And
Where do
I
you
would
see that in
argue
the Bible? Where do you see separation of powers in the Bible?
it's not that you see separation of powers in the Bible, but you see the upstream, like the stone that goes in to the lake. The separation of powers is the ripple. The stone that starts it off is the depravity of man, right? The tendency to tyranny. Uh,
Right.
you
So
can
if
look in the Old Testament, right? The judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's not good for a society, right?
are you saying that the framers were looking at the Bible for examples of what not to do and how they could actually make a good society or
No,
make a good
that's
government?
that's not what I'm saying.
Okay,
I
so
I would take.
could
I
you
know
be
this may
so
surprise you. I would
what
take the position that the founders were positively influenced by Christianity.
ki- okay, what principle? Like is it a civil rights, due process, separation of powers, separation of church and state? Like so, what
Yeah, the
principle do we see
separation of church and state is a big part of that.
where do you see that in the Bible?
It's I feel like we had this conversation already, going through some of Jesus's interactions with the civil magistrate, the way Paul wrote of the civil magistrate to the church, the way the church is seen as distinct from the civil
So
magistrate.
but okay, but in those instances, those aren't that's not Paul or God saying that they ought to be separate. He's just dealing with them because there's a Christian church
Hmm.
and there is a government and they're already separate, and so he is dealing with them as they are. That's not saying that they ought to be separate. He's
Okay.
not endorsing some sort of principle of separation of religious power and secular power. That's not what's going on here.
Okay.
Well, so I get so then you said okay. Then where is it?
But
I don't.
that's the thing. You seem to be wanting to find explicit in the text these doctrines and ideas, when in fact what happens is you see the raw materials for those in the text that show themselves in the principles of the founding, such as all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights,
But
life,
they're not.
liberty.
Okay, but they're not created equal. Like the
They
Israelites,
are.
the Moabites
The,
are not
the
created equal.
just
If you're born
because
a
what you
Moabite,
see as uh, a perceived inequality before the law is not a
from
commentary
God.
on the value
No.
of the human
It's
individuals.
not. It's not a perceived inequality before the law. This is an actual inequality mandated by God. God gave them
Okay.
this rule. He told the Ammonites and the Moabites, you can't come in here.
hmm
So we're not talking about perceived, actual
But
from God.
just like for example, the prohibition from women in the pastorate or in the office of elder, um, that that is a perceived inequality, but it's not a representation that men and women are somehow unequal. Similarly, the way that the temple, the place of worship was set up, will have some
How is that
segregations
not
in
an
it, is
how
a
is that not
perceived inequality, but that's not a commentary on the value of the individuals involved.
okay? So question. So all right, so if it said that black people um, can be pastors, but white people can't, would that just be a perceived inequality or actual inequality?
Um, that I mean, that's a hypothetical that doesn't exist in Christianity
No, no. I mean,
because
it's functionally equivalent. I'm just asking. So we're saying so in the Bible we see that here men can hold a position that women can't, and you
mhm,
saying that's not an inequality. So I'm saying
yeah,
if white people could hold it but black people couldn't, would that be a just a perceived inequality or an actual inequality?
I, I would say in these terms it would be a perceived inequality because we're not talking about um, th- this reminds me of our conversation on freedom with libertarianism.
Hmm.
An understanding of freedom um, will, but depending on your understanding of freedom, it will change how you view this, right? And so I think you're coming from this more libertine view of freedom, that liberty means I can do whatever I want. I have access to all of the options available.
Well, we're not
When
talking about liberty. We're just talking
no,
about equality.
I understand,
Okay.
but a restriction of that perceived liberty is then viewed as a structural inequality. So if I don't have this option, if I have this door closed to me, then somehow I'm less than because somebody else gets this ability or gets this potential that I don't.
Well,
I,
so
does that make sense? At least the way I framed it.
that's not my position. Because my issue is not that there's liberty being restricted.
Okay.
It's that it's been restricted just for certain people, and it's not based on what they've done. It's based on who they are. Because if it
Right.
was based on what they've done, that is equality across the board.
Okay.
So, but that's not the way it's working. It's because I I
But you're
was born
seeing this
looking like
restriction
this.
of liberty as an inequality. But
It's
because,
a,
for example, if the Moabites were permitted into the Holy of Holies, would would, would there be any restriction of liberty there?
so if a Moabite was to convert to Judaism and then be allowed in, cool. Like so, I will be okay with hey. The rule is you have to be following Judaism to come
hmm
in. That is cool. I understand that rule. That would be equality. The difference is you have an Egyptian and you have an Moabite.
hmm
Both of them convert to Judaism. The Moabite's not allowed in because he's a Moabite. That
Okay.
is inequality.
But it's an inequality that's stemming from what you would see as a limitation on liberty, right?
Well,
That they
yeah,
are prohibited from access in a way that somebody else isn't.
yes.
And so that's the
Because of
connection
who?
I was drawing. Is
Because
this This
because of
this
who they are, not because of what they've done. Because if it was because of what they done, it would not be inequality. Like
yeah, I
if both of us, neither one of us had access to if I didn't have access to a room because of I committed a crime and you didn't,
mhm.
that's not inequality. If I can't get in because I'm black, well, that's inequality.
I could see that argument being made, except that what we're dealing with here is not black white distinction. It's not any of the racial stuff that we deal with in a
Yeah,
modern
it's
context.
Moabite. It's
Yeah,
Moabite. But these two groups singled out, two ethnic groups.
mhm. But and I would say that okay, number one, I'm glad we were able to at least agree in principle of the limitation on liberty leading to the perceived inequality.
Mhm.
Um, I would say that the restriction isn't based on who they are, but on the plans of God, on what God is working through the people of Israel, um, and that will necessarily create boundaries, right? For example, Israel received the oracles of God. Nobody else did. There was no emissary sent to Sodom to bring the Ten Commandments there. There was no emissary sent to the Promised Land ahead of time for the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Amalekites, all the ites, right? And so one could look at that and go, well, that's not fair, right? That's an inequality. Well, it's not an inequality in that sense. It's just that's how he did it, and we can we can
But
argue over that,
I would
but
say
at
that
the end
that
of the
is
day, it doesn't matter, and that's not the type of distinction that the framers were looking at. They were looking at on the whole, right? In a Christian framework, from start to finish, you see the value and worth of human life, and through the gospel, you see there is no more barbarian and Scythian. There's no more Jew and Greek, right? We're
that's
all
for the
one in Christ,
gospel. That is for the
right?
gospel. That is
It,
not the
it, it
way.
is,
That's not the way governments were treating individuals.
but when it
'Cause
comes
you could
to the
say a
gospel going
Moabite,
out to the people, I mean, everybody is equal in that regard, right? Because
right,
all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There's
right.
not these specialized um, tribes of Israel that are going out meeting judgment on those who have committed any particular sin at this point. There is an equality of man out there, and part of that equality is we are all equally destitute in and of ourselves. We are selfish by nature. We are violent by nature, haters by
But
nature,
okay, but
and
so but the
and so
issue
that gets
is
into the separation of powers, right? Because the individual is going to be selfish, is going to look after me, and so by separating powers, you are able to disperse those evil desires
I would say
and
that's a good
and
reason to that's a good reason to have a
yeah.
separation of powers. But you don't see that in the Bible.
Again, I would argue you see the raw materials for it, right? The anthropology,
So the raw
and the
materials,
governmental abuses, right?
the
You
like
see that,
those
and then
so the raw materials that you're pointing to, I see those as examples of what not to do.
uh, okay, well, if you don't value human equality, I mean that's your thing to do.
No,
I
that's not.
can't.
So no, so no. What? So
That's
you
all
want
I've
to say
been talking about.
no,
And
no,
if
no,
you
no. Wait,
look at
what?
that as an example
No,
of what not to
no,
do,
but that's not. That's
okay,
not. But we don't see equality here. We see the Moabites and the Ammonites can't are treated differently because of who they are. The Amalekites had to die because of who
hmm
they were. So
again, I
that is
would say you're distorting the justification for it, and that's influencing
you're
your
so there were some
conclusion.
individuals that did something bad to some other individuals. Hundreds of years later,
hmm
after all the parties involved are dead, other people are being punished. Eh, So if any individual Amalekite who God told who was told who was commanded to be killed, they were killed not because of anything they did. They were killed because they were Amalekite.
Okay, and what I'm saying
That's an
is
example of
that
what not to
principle
do.
was not instantiated in the law, and it was not a principle that the founders brought forth
That's
because it's not a principle.
the principle.
And you seem to be arguing that that's what they were looking at, and they were going, you know what, we don't want to do that, so let's do something different.
That's why I brought up with the Moabites and Ammonites, because that principle is instantiated in the law.
Except they're
Because
not
Israel has
establishing a church. They're
this is
specifically not establishing a church. That's what the First Amendment was about. But they weren't establishing a church, so they're not going to set priority or set regulations on who sits where at the worship service.
okay.
Like, and expecting that to have an influence.
But what we're talking about is the
you're talking about
inequality.
oil and water.
Even it's not, because and it's not even just there. You can even look at the way slaves were treated. If you were a non-Hebrew slave, you was a slave permanently because you weren't Hebrew. That is again, that's inequality before the law.
I
That
mean,
has nothing to do with a church. This is about how individuals are being treated, and it's based on your ethnic group.
okay, I think you're making mountains out of molehills because you are intentionally. And granted, I appreciate the pushback, but when you
You
look
said
at
intentionally what cherry picking?
yeah,
Okay,
I mean, I can appreciate it. I mean,
but it's not
that's
okay.
why I like coming back. I enjoy this
Yeah,
kind of conversation.
okay. How? What example could I give that wouldn't be? What counter example could I give that wouldn't be cherry picking?
Uh,
Because if you're saying the overall message is A, and then I look and I see 9A, 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 and I just pick
mhm.
one, I say, hey, I don't see this here. Like, that's not cherry picking. That's me
Okay,
just pointing out just massive contradiction.
well, okay. So we were talking about natural right to life, right?
Mm.
God given right to life, and you brought up the commands to exterminate the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and I point out that though that was not instituted in the law to go out and kill these people, that was a unique circumstance that God specifically told specific group of people at a specific period of time to go and do the thing.
Okay, so the
And you're
principle,
using that as a way to undermine the principle that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, including life.
no.
And what
So,
I'm saying is you're using an example that's not the principle, even in the context in which it was executed. And you're using that to say this is part of a trend that establishes a new principle. That's the type of thing I'm talking about. And I think that's why your position is off base, because you're not understanding what's happening in the context that is happening in.
okay,
Plain and simple.
so if it was just that one, that'd be, th- you might have a point, except there's several instances of like
Right.
a dozen of
Can
them.
you give an example in the law that Israel had that established a mandate to exterminate a people group?
So in the law,
Yeah.
okay. So
But because we're talking about the principles, we're talking about the
right.
prescriptive principles that were given to Israel.
Hmm.
Can you name any instance in the law that prescribed wholesale that people got to go?
Okay. So remember that the issue wasn't that they were that it was execution here. They were killing. The
But
issue
the
was
principle we're
collective.
talking
The
about is the
principle.
right to
The
life.
principle. No, the principle I was talking about was collective punishment.
I understand, but the
However,
principle I was talking
here's the
about was the
problem.
right to life, which is what I put in the post that you wanted to talk about. And if you
Here's
want to move the goalpost, that's
I'm not
fine,
moving the goalpost,
but you're not undermining
but
the argument that I was making.
I wasn't moving the goalpost. But here's the other issue that you run into is that God gives a command. So does the authority of God, does it change? Are some commands greater than others?
What does that question mean? I didn't quite
So
understand
so
it.
you have a law, you have a Mosaic law that came from God, and you have specific commands that come from God.
Correct.
So it's all the law. It's from God.
I would disagree with that assessment. That's like saying God has established the laws of physics as part of creation, and anytime He acts in a miraculous way to undermine or counteract the laws of physics, that therefore changes the laws of physics.
No.
Exactly. So
No,
God
that's
has
100%.
established a principle, has established a set of laws, and is free and well within his authority to say, hey, in this instance, I need you to do this. Go do that.
Okay, so
And that doesn't undermine the principle of the law.
it does undermine the principle because it happens so often.
Okay. And if that's the position you want to take,
But
that's fine. But recognize that's not the way the founders were approaching the biblical mandates.
okay,
That's not
so
how they were approaching the text.
I,
That's
I
not the
I
way
was okay.
most people
If
uh,
you
uh,
okay,
approach the text. And I mean,
I will concede that if you ignore large chunks of the Bible, then somehow you could get this.
okay,
But but
I'll accept your concession.
all right. But it's like past 8:30. I'm surprised my daughter didn't bust in here.
I know. I just noticed what time it was, and I was wondering why I didn't see her.
Yeah.
But
But
maybe
anyway,
we can stop before she barges in.
yeah, yeah, we do that. But anyway, man, I enjoyed the conversation. I want appreciate you for coming on, and yeah, I want have you back on soon. If I think of something else or you post something else, I'll be like, I disagree with that.
All right,
And
I'll try to be more edgy
yeah,
in the memes and posts that I make.
yeah, man. All right, man. Well, good to see you, man. Be good, brother.
Take care.
And guys, thanks for tuning in.